today, Revel launched the newest iteration of the Ranger, and well, it's the first major update since the V2 was released back in April of 2023. So, well, what's changed over the last 3 years or so? So I pedaled it for a month on everything from a bike packing trip to long day rides and of course quick hour-long spins to find out. So stay tuned for all of the details and of course my overall thoughts on the latest Ranger. Now, before we do get into this video, I do want to take a quick moment to let you all know that this one is supported in part by Ortlieb. Ortlieb is, well, a familiar name here at Bikepacking.com. And for more than 45 years, they've been building bags for everything from daily commutes to rides along the Continental Divide. Every Ortlieb bag is designed and manufactured in their own factory in Germany with a clear focus on long-term durability. So back in 1992, they pioneered 3D high-frequency welding, a process that continues to set the standard for lightweight construction and truly waterproof performance. So to learn a little bit more about Ortlieb and their offerings, you can do so by clicking on the card in the top right corner here or finding the link in the description below. All right, so what's the same here? Well, first and foremost, the Ranger is still Revel's fast, carbon fiber, XC style, full suspension bike. It's a bike that, well, thrives on the race course, doesn't really hold back when racing your friends, and still makes sense as a bike for your all-day adventures to, of course, quick after-work laps. So while it's very much Revel's fastest full suspension bike, the Ranger has always kind of leaned into being more than a pure XC bike. It doesn't shy away from descents, and while it's not going to replace your medium or long travel trail bike, you could argue it covers that hardtail or XC bike slot for long days where efficiency really matters, while also, of course, being a great, say, short travel trail bike for those particular rides. So overall, just kind of looking at the bike, I mean, it appears to be pretty similar to the last version. So the frame shapes might be maybe a little bit sharper and more modern compared to the more rounded look of the V2, but the basic layout is very familiar. You still have that same kind of vertical shock orientation and the same CBF suspension platform found on all of Revel full suspension bikes. So I spoke about this in my V2 review, but the Canfield Balance Formula, or CBF, is Revel's licensed suspension platform designed to keep the bike's pedaling and braking behavior consistent kind of throughout the travel by placing the suspension's instant center in a specific relationship to the chainring and the drivetrain forces. So in simple terms here, it tries to balance anti-squat so bike pedals efficiently without actually relying heavily on shock compression damping while still letting that suspension stay active over bumps, under braking, and deeper into the travel. So the ultimate goal is that magic carpet feel that Revel often talks about. Good traction, minimal pedal bob, and suspension that feels like it's staying supportive without feeling harsh or locked out. And just like the V2, where I spoke about, well, the highlights of the way CBF performs on that bike, and of course my Revel Rascal review last year that I published, my love for the CBF platform continues on to this day. All right, so the bike still comes in 4 sizes. You got small, medium, large, and extra large. You still have 2.6-inch tire clearance. You've got internal routing throughout, a threaded BSA bottom bracket, and 31.8 millimeter seat post diameter. It now also comes with a 180 millimeter direct mount rear rotor, up from the 160 millimeter on the previous version. And that is all probably a good sign of where this bike is headed. It's still the Ranger, but it's clearly a more capable Ranger, which is a good segue into, well, what is new. And there is quite a bit. So the current Ranger was already a short travel bike that leaned more trail than pure XC, as I mentioned, but the new geometry really pushes it much further into that direction, or more accurately, it keeps up with where a lot of these XC style bikes are headed. More capable, more confident, but without really completely sacrificing pedal efficiency. So some of the new things that you might or might not notice right away start with the linkage itself. So the bike gets a refined layout with the lower link now basically sitting inside the frame. That, paired with the redesigned hardware, helps kind of create a stiffer and lighter overall bike. In fact, Revel says there are It's an average weight savings of around 200 grams across all of the size runs. Kind of keeping that link contained, it helps it be protected from the elements. And in my testing, it actually did a pretty good job of that. So while the Ranger still uses the cam field balance formula, the kinematics have also kind of been updated. As Revel puts it, the suspension has been specifically refined for what a downcountry bike should feel like. And it is now more progressive than the previous two versions. Travel increases from, you've got 115 millimeter rear and 120 millimeter front on the previous version. This one's got 120 rear, 130 front. So the head tube angle slackens nearly 2 degrees, also from 67.5 to 65.7 degrees. Reach also grows by 10 to 17 millimeters depending on the size, and stack rises a touch as well. And the wheelbase jumps by as much as 47 millimeters on the extra large. The medium I tested measures 1,207 millimeters, which is 37 millimeter increase over the previous version. So also new is the proportional chainstay sizing, something we've seen, I guess, more of across the industry over the last handful of years to kind of help with weight distribution and more consistent handling from size to size. Although the difference is pretty darn small on the Ranger. So the small and medium share a 435 millimeter chainstay, while the large bumps up to 437 millimeters and the extra large lands at 439 millimeters. So at the same time, the seat tube angle also steepens to 77 degrees and the effective top tube actually gets shorter across all sizes. So that should help compensate for that longer front end and kind of keep the seated position from feeling too stretched out. But I will share more on how that translates to the ride quality here shortly. And finally, the bottom bracket does go 1 millimeter lower, now sitting at 338 millimeters with a 41 millimeter bottom bracket drop. All right, so in short here, well, the new Ranger looks less like a light downcountry bike and more like a proper modern short travel trail bike. Whether that's a good thing probably depends on what you liked about the old Ranger or your riding preferences. But in reality, what Revel has done here is make the Ranger more approachable for more people, more rides, and more terrain. On paper, the geometry should make the bike feel more planted, give riders, say, more confidence at speed, and generally make it more fun. But did they actually pull that off? Let's find out. All right, real quick, before we get into ride thoughts and sizing, just morning on the river just does not get better. Birds are chirping, things are budding, summer and gunny. Feels real good. Yeah. All right, so before we get into the overall ride thoughts, I want to talk about, well, the bike fit and how that translates to time on the trail. Because for a lot of customers, this is one of the most important parts of the equation, especially if you're in my boat, 5'9.5", 32-inch inseam, plus 2 ape index. So to say I'm a tweener for most bike brands is probably an understatement. In fact, sizing often is the most frustrating part of looking at geometry charts and trying to kind of figure out which bike I should actually ride. I won't lie, I actually lose sleep over it. So for a long time, I've been a medium on Revel bikes, but a few things have kind of changed since I reviewed the previous Ranger. Modern geometry, it's just modernizing. And then my riding style, and then probably most important, what I personally want out of a bike these days. So on this Ranger, I feel like I very much could have ridden a large. So the medium wasn't a bad fit. It was still rideable, still efficient, and still had that quick responsive feel that you'd expect from a Ranger. But when trail got steeper or faster, I felt maybe a little too far over the front end in the fork. A longer stem could have certainly helped, but overall what I really wanted was a bit more reach, a bit more room between, say, my hands and my body and my feet, and a little bit more bike in front of me, right? And the three years ago aboard the V2 Ranger, I didn't necessarily feel this way, but when I reviewed the Revel Rascal last year, the medium almost felt like my ideal travel to speed ratio. It was still nimble, it pedaled really well, and it could handle nearly everything I threw at it. So in reality, I probably should have kind of taken that hint, right? If I really wanted a similar feeling on this shorter travel bike, sizing up may have actually made some sense here. Of course, Sizing up would also come with its own trade-offs, right? So the large would give me more reach and, well, a longer wheelbase, which I think would actually help with confidence and body position on descents, but it would also take away a little bit of that kind of snappy, compact feel that makes a short travel bike like this so fun in the first place. Now, that simply won't be the case for everyone, of course. If you prioritize kind of that quick handling, tight single track, and I don't know, that more traditional XC feel, the medium might still be the right call. But where I'm at in kind of my riding style and bike preferences, I think I would have gone with the large on this Ranger. And honestly, this is where I think Revel's fifth size could help here. Not because Revel's sizing is way off. They've been pretty consistent, but because there are a lot of riders around me, 5'9", 5'10" mark, where, yeah, they're stuck between sizes, especially as bikes kind of get longer and more capable, right? So I'm obviously biased here, but a true medium large would make this decision a whole lot easier. All right, so leaning more into the ride thoughts here. So I genuinely really like this bike. It feels primed for, say, all-day adventures where efficiency is key, but it doesn't fall apart when the trail gets kind of rough or the descents kind of get a little bit more rowdy. So for reference, I ran the rear shock at roughly 177 PSI, which translates to around 30% sag. So on the 11-click RockShox Ultimate Deluxe rear shock, I settled at 5 clicks from slow, and that really felt like the sweet spot for me. It managed those longer, faster descents really well without taking away from that planted and grounded and snappy feeling the CBF platform kind of gives you on those climbs. And then speaking of climbing, I felt really comfortable settling into hour-plus climbs, but it also handled short, kind of punchy efforts really well. It stands out in technical terrain too. So that rear wheel has this way of almost kind of hugging the rocks. And when you need to kind of, I don't know, focus on a really tough move and put down a lot more power, the rear end almost feels like it helps spring you up and over when you're hammering down on the pedal. So I've spent some time on the DW Link and split pivot bikes, and those bikes are incredibly efficient and really great under braking, but I don't think they feel quite as good on those really high power technical moves as the CBF does. So just as important though, the rear end feels very active under light to moderate braking. So obviously if you're kind of fully hammering down on the brakes, that's certainly going to change how any bike rides. But when I'm feathering the brakes through, say, a rock garden descent, the Ranger did a tremendous job of keeping that kind of grippy, comfortable rear end feel. Paired with the increased wheelbase, slacker front end, and overall kind of geometry changes, I found myself spending less time on the brakes and certainly more time playing around on the trail. I will note that while I did lock out the bike on some pavement and it locks out extremely well, I almost always kept it open on single track for that rear wheel traction. So one thing I did adjust right away was the front end height. So like the Spearfish I rode last year, on a bike like this, I almost prefer to be a little bit closer to the trail. So I trimmed about 20 millimeters of that steer tube and lowered the stem, which helped me kind of feel a bit more connected to the front end. It also extended my effective reach ever so slightly. I'd argue maybe around 5-6 millimeters of effective reach was gained by kind of stretching out and lowering down, which isn't a lot, but it's also not nothing either. So over the course of, say, 3-4 hour rides, I never felt like this bike was ever working against me. There were times when I got going a little too fast and kind of had to reel it back in a little bit, and maybe a little bit more overall length would have helped there. But even on steep, fast, and genuinely fun descents, the Ranger held its own for what a short travel bike should handle. And on the climbs, well, the bike feels like it's really made for it, made for the up and down. It positioned me really nicely in the middle of the bike, and I never felt like I had to kind of stand up or shift my weight forward just to keep the front tire planted. And for an all-day bike, well, that's exactly what you want. All right, so all told, what this bike does really well is, well, it's a no-nonsense, efficient, from A to B bike. It's going to get you there quickly. It tackles chunky terrain as well as a short travel bike can. And of course, it handles descending and braking better than the previous version. And as I found out, it even manages a load surprisingly well. let's get into how it bike packs now. All right, so as I do with all of the bikes I review, well, of course, I loaded this Ranger up, even if it was just for an overnighter, to kind of see how it pedals with weight. And whether the engineers at Revel, or any bike brand for that matter, realize it's, well, loading up a bike usually makes it feel pretty darn great. And that's no different here with this Ranger. So for starters, the front triangle does feel a little bit more shrunk down here, ever so slightly from the V2, likely due to that steeper seat tube and more sloping top tube. That said, there's still enough room for 2 bottles or a bottle and a small tool keg. You could also commission someone to build a frame bag and optimize that space even more, which is exactly what I did. I had San Udall build a frame bag specifically for this bike, and it made the space way more usable. I was able to actually fit my Bikepacking DOP kit, which holds a bunch of kind of random essentials, my stove kit, and a few other kind of small odds and ends, including a trowel and my pump. So Adam does a great job making bags, and this was no different. It fit like a glove. He also made it a direct mount wherever he could. So you've got 2 mounts up here, and then obviously you have the 2 bottle mounts within the down tube of the frame. He also added a non-drive side pocket for, say, I don't know, lube. This is a electronic drivetrain, so of course I had to carry an extra battery, and of course my wallet fit in there nicely. All right, so I also threw on and tested the new Tailfin Journey rack, which to my surprise was an excellent rack for a full suspension bike. And actually, Adam told me I needed to cover up the Ranger logo, and I did just that for that review, and I just remembered. So there we go. Looks pretty good. So the review of that rack is linked below. But as a whole, the Ranger fared, well, really well on a very sloppy bike packing trip. So I tested the mud clearance, which I seem to do with all Revel bikes at this point. So I tested the V2 Ranger in 2023 on my Sloppy Joe route in Moab, and then again on this route with this new bike. And one thing I noticed is that despite the V2 also having 2.6-inch clearance, the clearance on the new Ranger seems, well, a little better. So all told, this thing felt really great loaded up. It would make a great single track bike packing rig, and honestly better than a lot of other bikes that I've tested in this category. So I went fairly light with my setup since I'm dialing in my gear for the Colorado Trail, and I tend to pack lighter when I am riding more single track or rugged terrain that kind of involves a bit of hike-a-bike. But it was still a full load with, you know, tent, sleeping bag, and all of the usual overnight gear. So the extra weight actually gave the bike an even more grounded feeling. Plus, with a load on the bike still maintained that sense of urgency and good maneuverability in that medium frame size. So in terms of sizing here, I do think a loaded bike can make that smaller size feel or make more sense. That all said, I still think I would have been just fine on a large too. All right, so the new Ranger comes in a variety of specs and 2 colors. You've got the red Zeppelin and this one, the Steezy. So there are 4 builds, and when you take a deeper look into these colors, it's almost like a raw carbon colorway, which I really, really love and appreciate. So there are 4 build options, starting with a frame-only option at $3,699 USD. You've got a SRAM Eagle 90 build at $5,599 USD. A SRAM EXO Eagle transmission build at $6,599 USD, and a SRAM XX Eagle transmission build, top dog build here, at $10,199 USD. So I tested the EXO Eagle transmission build. I actually asked for the Eagle 90 build, but actually, I don't know. I'm happy I went with this because the last Eagle 90 group that I tested was not exactly my favorite. So the build did come in at 28.5 pounds after my test period. So undoubtedly, there's a bunch of dirt stuck in and all around it. So take that all with a grain of salt. All right, so there wasn't much I didn't actually like about the build, but of course there are a few things that kind of stood out. First, the crank length. So I would have loved to see Revel actually change crank lengths based on frame size. So I've gotten used to 165 millimeter cranks over the last year or so. And I really like that extra 5 millimeters of clearance. So when I got on this bike, I noticed the 170s pretty darn quickly, both in how they felt and, well, in a few instances, pedal strikes. I will tell you, I was certainly hesitant about shorter cranks, but now that I've used them on many bikes, I just want them all. I want 165, even 160 with a bike with a lower bottom bracket. I'm totally fine with that. So on the Ranger, all sizes do come with 170 millimeter cranks. All right, so after years of riding transmission, well, it certainly gets the job done. But now that different kind of lever shifter options are popping up from other companies, I really do hope that SRAM updates the shifter down the road, make it more ergonomic, more friendly on the hand. And of course, this only matters to a very small percentage of folks, but transmission can be a big pain in the butt to run with a rear rack unless you actually have the right adapters, which I did and I do, but that's still more money and more fuss. That all being said, after 2 really bad brake sets from SRAM, the DB8 and DB6 brakes that I tested, the Motive Silver brakes on this bike felt great. So the bite point was, well, super consistent. They were super strong when I needed them, and they still had a great ability to feather. I was really impressed with these things, and I would buy them in a heartbeat. So another standout component is the 1UP carbon bar. So this is the V2 version, and I spent a bit of time on the original version and absolutely loved it, but you can honestly feel that compliance and that flex in the bar, say over washboards or trail chatter, which adds a ton of noticeable amount of comfort. But it's not over the top, right? So that's the important thing. The one downside is the clamping area. Because of those ovalized shape kind of right outside the clamping area, you do have limited mounting area, so they don't work well with other handlebar harnesses. I did get the new Rogue Panda V2 Blue Ridge to work on this, but some other systems with limited adjustability in and out may not play nice here. So another big win in my eyes on this bike is the Maxxis Dissector 2.4-inch tires. It's an unconventional but pretty awesome spec choice for this style of bike. It's certainly a softer and slower tire, so if pure speed or racing is your priority, you're certainly going to want to either swap out the rear or maybe both, but I never felt the urge to do that. I love this tire, and I think it's great for sloppy adventures or rides where you really want to feel that grip. Also, I love the blacked out stealthy Maxxis logos. More of that, please, Maxxis. That looks really good. Finally, dropper post. Yeah, that's a big one, right? 210 millimeters of dropper on this medium, although I was actually told that the production bikes will come with 190 millimeters of dropper. Either way, that's a lot of drop, and it gives you a ton of room to kind of maneuver when kind of the going gets steep, tight, and technical. So depending on the build, the small bikes range from 150 millimeters of dropper, while XLs go all the way up to 240 millimeters of dropper. All right, so rounding out the bike build, so the Pike Ultimate Fork is a really nice fork choice here. It's easy to adjust based on your preferences, and it feels like a great fork for, say, heavier trail duty without actually being overly heavy or too flexy. It certainly inspired confidence, and I think it makes a lot of sense here over the Sid Ultimate that was on the previous Ranger. And finally, the bike does come with Zip 10 high top S wheels. So these are really nice wheels that kind of help keep the weight down. They're extremely light, but they also maintain that stiffness with a hookless asymmetric 30 millimeter internal rim. So overall, it's a very solid build with only a few spec choices that I'd personally tweak, but of course it is also pretty expensive as well. All right, so the V3 Ranger, it went through some pretty serious changes here. And well, of course, that ride quality absolutely reflects that. It feels much more capable on trail, but also doesn't kind of lose that quick, responsive, and efficient kind of feel that the Ranger is known for. So the CBF platform is still excellent, and it continues to be one of my favorite suspension layouts for this style of bike. That all said, this is a premium bike, and well, that pricing certainly reflects that. There are a lot of kind of links and bearings and hardware and details kind of packed into that frame. And while that kind of helps create a very refined ride, it also means that this is far from a budget short travel option. I do think riders who loved the sharper, more XC-like feel of the previous Ranger may find this one a little bit more trail-oriented. It's longer, it's slacker, more planted, and more confident at speed. So for me, that's mostly a good thing. But I think as a result, I want to be on a longer bike. So I wouldn't mind an additional size to kind of help create a better fit for the average rider. And honestly, it's just good to see Revel still here. After Adam Miller sold the company, things certainly seem to, well, go sideways for a bit, but he has since bought it back. And if the Ranger is any indication of what's next, I'd say Revel is doing some pretty exciting things. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the new V3 Ranger. Are these shorter travel trail bikes the future? Are they replacing hardtails and XC bikes for a lot of riders, or becoming their own thing entirely? Let us know in the comment section below. As always, thank you all so much for watching. If you like what you saw in this detailed review, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell. And if you want to help support these reviews, everything we're doing at Bikepacking.com, well, you can do so by joining the Bikepacking Collective. So the Bikepacking Collective offers a lot of awesome perks. You've got over 100+ discounts with brands in the industry. You've got giveaways. You've got the Bikepacking Journal and the all-new base camp. So to learn a little bit more about the Bikepacking Collective, or just to join, well, you can do so by clicking on the card in the top right corner or finding the link in the description below. As always, folks, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, pedal further.